Hi, and thanks for joining us. We are Chicago Lawyers. We're here to talk to you about things that you find interesting and topics of the day. Hi, Dana and Ish. How are you ladies?
Great. I've got so much going on right now. I just bought a house, and that's way too much change for me. I don't think I'm going to make it.
So life's crazy right now. What about
really
you, Dana?
is.
What's going on?
I too am suffering from crazy week. You know, it's been a very active, fun week.
For myself as well. I moved my office, and everything's
that's
just
exciting.
Been crazy. So, yeah.
Crazy but good.
Crazy but good, most definitely. So I want to talk to you ladies tonight about some probate issues and about some custodial issues, things that are interesting. So what's going on with probate, and can you tell me or explain why we need probate and kind of a probate 101 primer? And,
yeah, sure. Well, let me just start from a very basic perspective that probate is an administration through court when someone passes away, and in that administration, it is the distribution of a person's assets.
So if I have a will and my family, after I pass away, my family discovers this will, what do they do with it? Can't they just sort of read it and do what it says?
Okay, well, that is a good question because people find themselves in that predicament all the time, and they oftentimes it's the first time, so they don't know what to do. And I encourage people to not to do anything really dramatic, especially not give away any assets that belong to the decedent just yet, because you always want to kind of cover your bases. And if you have a will and it names someone to be the executor, then that person it would behoove them to contact an attorney just to make sure they take the right steps from the beginning. Now, whether an estate is subject to probate is a question that has to be answered based on the circumstances. So
like
that
how
means
how they passed away?
No, meaning
the value of the property.
Yeah, the circumstances surrounding their assets and their value.
Like if they own real estate or a bunch of vehicles
exactly.
or
For example,
property.
If you currently, our threshold in Illinois is $100,000 in probate assets. So what that means is that some assets are considered probate assets and some are considered non-probate assets.
What about jewelry?
You're not
curious.
going to know. It's typically a probate asset.
Okay.
Now, the reason is that jewelry is not subject to a contract. It's not subject to distribution by contract. That's kind of the hinge, is that if you have an asset that is subject to a contract, that's not going to be considered a probate asset.
When you say
the best example is life insurance.
Okay.
Life insurance, you make a contract with the insurer, and you tell the insurance company, when I die, I want you to pay this benefit amount to this beneficiary. And as long as you name a beneficiary, the insurance company is obligated to send that beneficiary your
So we don't need
insurance.
probate, basically, in that instance.
If all you had was a life insurance policy, you had no other assets, and you had a beneficiary named, then you would not need probate. So again, coming back to trying to figure out whether it's something that is applicable in your estate, you're going to have to determine, and an attorney is going to walk you through this. You go through all of
for a fee, right?
likely
Always.
for a fee, because it is legal advice. You're taking time from the attorney to legally advise you on what your responsibilities are.
Do you think the family members are obligated to go to the attorney that prepared the estate plan, or is it natural that they should want to seek their own counsel?
I think they are absolutely not obligated to use the same attorney that did the estate plan, and rather they should find an attorney, whether it's the same one or a different one, that they have a connection with. Because really, an administration post-death is something that people have to be comfortable working with their legal representative.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to be working closely together. You have to trust them. You have to be able to communicate with them. You have to understand them. So if you don't feel comfortable with that person who drafted the plan, by all means, feel free to call him, to talk to him or her, but contact another attorney and see if you have a better connection.
Elisa brought up the issue of cost, and my thoughts go to, if there's some property left behind, I'm not so sure the family wants to expend a lot of funds in terms of running it through the courts. Is there some way that you can assure us that this would be a very cost-effective action to hire an attorney rather than just trying to figure it out on their own? What could go wrong if you don't?
Well, let me just understand your question. Are you saying that if you're trying at at all costs to avoid a probate administration?
Because of
is
the
there a way
money.
to do that?
Correct.
Because maybe the value of the estate is low?
Exactly.
It's going to depend on the nature of the assets. I mean, you might have a requirement to pass these assets to the beneficiaries through the probate administration. And the way to avoid probate is to have the estate plan done during the life of the person who died. That would be how you could avoid the probate process. Estate plans are created many times for that purpose.
So what if the family members, in consultation with the person whose the estate plan is for, all agree that no matter what the size of the estate, they want to avoid probate, and then when the person passes on, they just follow the rules that are laid out in the will? Is that illegal?
Well, now wait a
just
minute.
bypass the court process entirely, regardless of the size of the estate?
The decision about avoiding probate does not lie with the beneficiaries. So it doesn't matter how many people want to avoid it. If the one person who owns these assets doesn't care or believes that he would rather go through the probate administration for reasons, there are several reasons to use the probate administration to your benefit, then that's the person that's going to decide whether they want to avoid it or not. So regardless of if everybody else wants
it's not
to
democratic
disagree.
necessarily.
Right, right. Now,
Gotcha.
I just wanted to real quick point out, if I could, that when you review an estate after someone's death, there is a threshold in Illinois of $100,000 of those probatable assets, in which case you will find yourself in probate unless a plan was properly made to avoid it. Or if you have a piece of real estate, even if the piece of real estate is less than $100,000 in value, you are likely going to be in probate court.
Gotcha.
Good
well,
to know.
That sounds to some degree complicated, so I guess an attorney is definitely necessary. Ish, I want to ask you a question about custody and things that you deal with every day. Who wins in the custody game? You know, what do you think about this?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues in custody is, can we have equal parenting time? I think most couples, parents, they approach the legal system by thinking we're going to keep this fair. And everyone thinks there's some definition of fair that we can all agree on. Now, if that were true, I probably would be out of a job. But one thing that I've heard a lot of is we want equal parenting time. We want shared time with the child. And the question I have is, do you think that's really feasible?
I mean, I have a friend of mine who's going through a nasty divorce for the last 4 years. And her ex-husband wants an 11-year-old child to be 1 week at his house, 1 week at her house, on and off. And she was able to successfully defend against that, which was a very costly argument. And the main idea was, my child is too young for all of this drama and needs more of a home base and less of the back and forth.
I agree with that completely. I mean, have you ever gone to the in-laws for Christmas and you have to pack up all your stuff and pretend you live there? It's so uncomfortable. It's not home. And I think it's really hard for children to adjust.
The opportunity to have shared parenting, especially the closest that it can be to 50-50, and if two parents can communicate well and they can live close enough to one another to make it work, then they should absolutely approach a 50-50
Well, Dana, it sounds
split.
like that might be in their best interest, but is it in the best interest of the child?
Absolutely. Because remember, that child identifies equally with the mother as with the father, which is sometimes difficult for the parent to realize, because the parent is looking at the child from their perspective and thinking that that's my child with all of and I want that child to have all of my traits and all of the things I want to teach it. But the child does not identify solely with one parent.
But what if they do? What if you have, like, for example, in my own household, my husband works full-time and is in night school. So even though we're married, I'm the primary caregiver, and my child spends most of the time with me. So I don't think even in a happily married situation, I don't think you could make an assumption that the child identifies equally with the parents.
No,
when I spend 80% of the time, the parenting time with our son.
I know you spend, in a lot of cases, moms spend a lot more time with the children, but still, it has been shown psychologically that children don't view themselves as only the child of one parent.
Well, that may be the case, Dana, but more than just parenting time, I think we need to be realistic about the location. Don't you think a child needs one home? I've actually had a judge say to me, Where's his PlayStation? Where's the Xbox? I mean, where does the child feel like they live?
Well, I think it's important to create a sense of home in both places. Children should have their bedroom at mom's and their bedroom at dad's, and they should feel like they have a home in both places.
Can you imagine feeling at home in two different places?
Absolutely. When I
Well,
was
maybe
young,
a rental, maybe my vacation house and my regular
yeah,
house,
but
I
if
could
I'm
feel
on
at home.
vacation, I don't feel comfortable. I'm not at home. I want to sleep in my own bed.
When it's your bed in your dad's house and your bed in your mom's house, it does feel like yours. It's your stuff on the wall. It's your clothes in the dresser. It's you feel more comfortable with that parent and that attachment from parent to child, rather than going to visit your parent and feeling like you don't belong there
Like
and you
you're
don't
the
have a
visitor.
place there.
That's an interesting perspective.
I mean, I
Dana.
think it's the ideal. I don't think it's reality by any stretch of the imagination. And maybe that's the problem, is that in order for that to become the ideal, it has to become the norm. And that goes to your
I think
original
you come
thought.
into another, area of disagreement.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Should it be 1 week with mom, 1 week with dad? Should it be half week with one parent, half of the week with another?
Or 1 month on, 1 month off. I mean, yeah.
Isn't that too confusing for a child to make sense of?
Well, I have personal experiences through friends who have co-parented successfully with an equal or very close to equal 40-60 or even exactly 50-50 shared time. And it has worked, in these experiences that I have seen, because the two parents are able to put the interests of the child first, and they still parent as though they were in a happy marriage. They have set aside their differences. The child and children have flourished in these situations.
Well, I mean, that sounds great, but I have to say that's not
It's
the
hard.
majority of the
I'm not
families
saying-
I work with.
Yeah, I would say that's 5% reality and 95% desire. I mean, at the end of the day, I think if you go to the Daily Center and you're in those floors that are handling divorce, you see people going toe to toe and really unable to agree.
I will say from personal experience that I like what you said about putting the child's interests first.
Yeah.
And I think the child gets lost in some of these decisions and some of the drama. I have to share the most heart-wrenching experience of my career thus far was at the Daily Center. We were leaving a court hearing. The child happened to be there. I was representing dad, and there are several different elevator banks. I was about to get on an elevator with dad. Mom was going to get on a different elevator, and the child could not understand it. He was a 4-year-old boy, and he was trying to pull mom and dad physically together so we could all go down the same elevator. And it just broke my heart, you know?
Yeah, that's really heart-wrenching. And
That
that's where the judges have the obligation to really, try to understand where the child is coming from. And
I think the judges really do try to push for co-parenting arrangements, and the two parents are the ones who are oftentimes segregating themselves because of their issues with the divorce and et cetera. There's a million things that cause that. But I think that we're moving in a positive direction, because I think the shared parenting and co-parenting arrangements are much more popular in divorce today than they were 15 years ago.
And we have better tools. We have a lot of online programs where both parents can log in, they can communicate in a non-threatening environment. There's also a record for the court. So it adds sort of a third eye, keeping watch on what's going on in the family and hopefully making things better.
Well, and I think in social media and celebrities are really making an effort as well to send positive messages in divorce, and I think it's becoming increasingly common to co-parent. So it's a good idea, and it is really the best interest of the child that we have to put in the forefront.
Right.
Definitely.
Well, we've talked about a lot of different exciting ways in which the law can impact your life, and I'm real excited to announce that we have another special guest. This time his name is Mr. Ricardo Islas, and he is coming because he is an independent filmmaker who deals with several legal issues in his own life.
Oh, that's
so
interesting.
I'm very excited, can't wait. We'll be back
great.
soon.
So we do the hot topic after. Welcome back, and thanks for being with us tonight. We are joined by filmmaker Ricardo Islas, who has a new film that he's working on, and I'd like to welcome you to the show, Mr. Islas. How are you?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks. So I heard a little rumor that you've been surrounding yourselves by lawyers a lot lately. Can you tell us how lawyers fit into the business of making films?
They do at different levels and at different stages. From the moment that you write a script, you need to register it
Who do you
So-
register it with?
with the Library of Congress.
Okay.
But many lawyers provide that service sometimes, depending on to what level you are partnered with one. I have some partners in my endeavors who are lawyers, and they help me to do those kind of things. And then later on, you will encounter different needs from insurances when you're using stunts or you do action scenes. There are different levels, and all of that is complicated. And it can lead to major problems later if you don't take care of them.
Do you ever have one
beforehand.
lawyer who works for you for the entire film?
Yes.
And they handle all of those different aspects?
Yes, sometimes I do. It depends on the scope of the project. It depends also on the budget. As an independent filmmaker, sometimes I work on my own projects that I self-fund or I fund with proceeds from other jobs that I do for other filmmakers. But sometimes I work for other producers who have much nicer budgets than the one that I have. And in those cases, for sure, they do have a producer's rep, or they have other kind of lawyers who are specialized, or usually entertainment lawyers, who take care of all these issues.
So in the area of entertainment law, that's what the attorney would focus on, is covering all of the needs for a film or for a particular project, and that's what they handle and are known to do.
Yes, but again, if I was part of the machinery of Hollywood, this conversation probably wouldn't even take place with me, because it happens in a legal office of a big production studio, and the filmmaker doesn't have to deal with all of this. Because I am an independent, I will have to sometimes write my own contracts. Those are the ones that I self-fund. Or I will have to deal with different levels of complexity and different contracts and lawyers who help out. In the field of entertainment law, there are many lawyers who take clients on pro bono basis. And when that happens, you get a little bit of what I think you guys were talking about earlier, which is partial services,
Right.
in which the lawyer maybe is not fully involved, but he will review your contracts, especially the distribution contracts after the movie is done, where many little details can really damage you later on, and they
Very
have
much
to,
so.
you as a filmmaker might not see it, the full picture. I know
Right.
that sounds like pun intended, but they do. The entertainment lawyers do, and that's where they can help.
Do you know of any filmmakers who have been sued, and what do you think is the highest area of risk?
There are many different little areas of risk for an independent filmmaker. There isn't something like a one major area. For example, if you have, like I was saying earlier, stunts, you need to be covered because unfortunately accidents happen. So it's very important to have all the proper insurances, which is not just a regular liability insurance. And it gets very precise to the extent that in your insurance application you need to specify if there's a fight, if there's a fall, if there's fire, things like that.
So let's take insurance, for example. You would not be working directly with an insurance agent to set up this policy. You would be communicating through a lawyer to set it up?
Like with everything else, it depends on the budget. If you have a lawyer that is working with you almost full time in your production, because maybe the lawyer, as it happened to me in this last movie we were making, I was working with partners who are lawyers, and they have a special interest in particular in my movie, but also in movie making in general. So they will go over all of those details with the insurance company, taking that off my shoulders because I have a lot of things on my plate. But many times I did it myself.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you paying these, entertainment law is a completely foreign practice to me. I don't know much about it, so a lot of these questions are coming from a very basic understanding. Now, are you typically paying lawyers by the hour, or do they charge, entertainment lawyers pay?
I'm sure that
charge
entertainment lawyers at a high level, they charge by the minute.
Okay.
In my
6
case,
minute increments.
yes, in my case, only once I had to deal with a situation like that, and I was working with another producer who had a bigger budget. But in my case, as an independent producer myself, usually what they do is when the movie gets distributed, they take a share.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Contingency.
yeah.
Yes,
Interesting.
contingency.
I want to jump in for just a minute. I want to show the audience a trailer of your film, and so we can take a sneak peek, and then after the trailer, we can talk a little bit about it and see if we have any additional questions.
Sure. Go to the table.
So after the
time,
trailer
take
has,
This is their first time in America.
Cool. How long are they staying for?
2 weeks.
Why so long? So we can bond as roommates. I'll smother you with a pillow.
Listen, you gotta remember, Samir and Fran don't know any English.
That's right. So even when I can't translate, please make an effort to communicate with them, okay?
I can speak some Hindi.
That's true.
Carla,
Good.
we agreed there was not gonna be any texting when we're eating.
We're not eating yet. Hi, मेरा नाम अंतोनेला आपका नाम क्या है?
Speed. C52, take 4.
Hey, easy. We're not suspects here. We'd be handcuffed if we were.
The only reason we're not handcuffed is because you're one of them.
That's not how it works. Believe me, I've been doing this for a living, okay? Listen, whatever happens in that room, don't yell, don't talk back to them, don't insult them, all right? Let's try to keep her cool.
Okay.
Mr. and Mrs. Salerno, thank you for coming. I think you know Chief Callahan. These are Officer Brennan from Homeland Security, Mrs. Kapoor from the Indian Consulate, and we are Special Agents O'Brien and Grady,
Special agents?
FBI.
Do you have some inspirations for yourself when you're making these movies, or?
Sources of inspiration.
I don't know.
So one thing I've always been really interested in are titles. I noticed the title of your film is called The Sacrifice. Can you explain how you chose that title for your movie?
Choosing the title is always difficult. I particularly like short titles, as Hitchcock used to do, Vertigo or Psycho, things like that, because they're catchy and people don't have a hard time remembering them. But it's very difficult. First you have an idea, then you turn it into a script, and then you scramble for a title. Sometimes it's the other way around. You have a title in your mind, then you need to find the story and write a script around it. So yeah, it's difficult, as well as it's difficult choosing the names for the characters.
How do you decide how long the film is going to be? Does the story kind of continually tell itself and then you reach through from the script to its conclusion, or do you start understanding the time limit and then working the film through that?
Well, I speak for myself. I know every filmmaker is different on this. I have a structure. You know, I almost write by numbers. And I also pay attention to the market. If I'm an independent filmmaker and I don't have big stars and big production values to offer, I should keep my movie to a maximum of 100 minutes or less. I cannot. I'm not Coppola, and I don't have 3 hours of Godfather to offer.
Right.
So I'm gonna keep it, short and sweet. But yes, once I have the structure on paper and I know kind of where I want to go and where, then I set myself free. I listen to a lot of music and I let just the characters tell me what they want to do.
Now, when you're sitting down and developing the script, do you seek out any particular outside influences, or do you have anybody that mentors you in terms of filmmaking?
At this point in my life, not anymore, but in my youth, I used to have people who mentor me back from where I'm from. But as far as influences, there are directors, filmmakers, worldwide filmmakers that I admire, from Hitchcock that I already mentioned, all the way to Federico Fellini in Italy, and other, I'm a foreigner, so I have different venues of sources of inspiration.
What about community? Do you feel like you work with a community of similar people, whether it's using a cinematographer on more than one film or working with actors repeatedly?
Yes. In America, I've been working since the late 90s, and some of the people who work with me today have been working with me since the late 90s.
Wow, that's great.
So it's almost family.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are new people who come in and come out.
And I bet as time goes on and you get to know one another's nuances and you can start to really read each other, probably
Yes.
the connection is evident.
With the crew, but also with the actors, I many times write for them, which makes it more fluid and more natural at the time of being on camera.
So in relation to your dealings with attorneys and different professionals, what would you advise new and emerging filmmakers to be kind of on the lookout for in relation to selecting people to work with in the entertainment industry?
Well, it's a very particular time where making a movie is very easy and showing it is very easy. What is very difficult is to get paid for it. So my only piece of advice for anyone who is starting, but also for someone who is in it, is that you really need to love it. If you're doing it for fortune and glory and the bling bling, you're on the wrong
Not going to
profession.
happen.
That's how it is in the law
I know.
as well.
Yeah, we can relate to that.
We can, most definitely.
You need to love it.
Well, that's good advice, and they always say that if you love your job, then you don't really spend much of a day at work. So
That's true.
It's true. After The Sacrifice, do you have any other additional movies that are kind of on deck or projects that you're working on?
No, I usually go one project at a time, and that's how I measure my life. So right now I'm in the middle of editing, and I don't know what's next.
I like that. It sort of relates to the cases we have. I think sometimes, there's just one case that sort of takes up your day and your week and your month, and you're just focused on that until it gets resolved.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, we'd like to really thank you for your contribution to tonight's show, and we look forward to seeing The Sacrifice in theaters hopefully soon, and the best of luck to you and your continued film success.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll be back in just a minute. That's good. I don't know what happened in the other.
I don't know what the hell that was.
Thanks for joining us and welcome back. We just had the most pleasurable conversation with independent filmmaker Ricardo Islas, and right now we're going to talk a little bit about real estate and building codes and how you as homeowners and apartment dwellers can understand your rights in relation to building codes in the world around you.
Alisa, I don't even know what a building code is. Can you just start at the very beginning, please?
Absolutely. Generally speaking, the building code is just a set of rules that's put out by the government and local municipality that relates to how buildings should be maintained or how they should be built. So the code is just nothing more than a set of laws that pertains to real estate and, generally speaking, keeping people safe and buildings built in the right way. So how building code cases usually come to me in one of two ways. Oftentimes I'll represent somebody who gets a ticket from the municipality and they're cited for weeds being too high or the porch being old and in need of repair, and they will be issued an administrative ticket, and they will ask me to not only interpret the ticket but to provide guidance on how they can deal with it and get out of the spotlight or view of the city. Another way that I deal with administrative law is in the construction process. Oftentimes there's permits and inspection requirements that can trigger tickets and administrative review.
Well,
of
I have
the
a question
construction
for you.
process.
I think that I know a little bit about what this is about because we had a power outage, there was a surge, our furnace blew up, and when we ordered a new furnace, he said I needed to pay for a permit for them to switch the old one out. Please explain.
That's the
unfortunately,
city wanting to get a little extra
A
revenue.
little more.
yeah, definitely. I mean, the city, many cities across the country use administrative rules as income generating kind of methods. But
And to clarify, I don't have any problem with building codes that are for the purpose of keeping everyone safe, keeping the community consistently in design, you know, things like
Right.
that have good, really justifiable and valid purposes. But sometimes you have to question these codes.
It goes
Yeah.
too
and to
far.
get a
Yeah.
to get a permit to you're not even changing the structure.
It's for an
Right.
appliance.
and
I
you're
agree.
changing out the appliance. You know, I don't know.
yeah,
about that.
I think the Great Windy City could take lessons from a lot of places around the country that aren't quite so money hungry or quite so permit heavy. But regardless, there's a long list of things that one could be doing in real estate that require a permit. So to change out a water heater or to make changes structurally, generally speaking, the permit process is what helps the city or the municipality to oversee what's happening in construction. So my involvement is to help decipher these issues, go to court on behalf of the homeowner, and help get them time to deal with it. So my recommendation really is just that an attorney be involved, because when people represent themselves in building code or municipal issues, oftentimes they don't get as much time as they might if they had counsel. So it's
Well, here's an interesting, turn, because sometimes when you buy a property, things have been done without a permit.
right.
And now you're buying a house.
Right. It
So
makes you
if
really
this-
concerned.
If this house had something improved upon it without a permit, is she now on the hook?
Yes. And I'm facing this as well in a commercial project that I'm involved in. Whenever the prior owner has not gotten a permit, if the work is done correctly and the only problem in the municipality is whether there's a permit at all, then a permit can be applied for after the fact and the file can be closed as complete. The issue comes up when the permit is not applied for and obtained in the first instance and the work is done incorrectly, because then the city has the interest in making sure that it's done correctly.
And so the buyer then has to expend the money to get it up to code?
Absolutely. So yeah, the general gist is that anytime the city has a building code, the main idea is to make sure that everything is code compliant. So we'll have to talk about this again in another time, but definitely, the takeaway here is just that people really need to pay attention to what's happening with their property and make sure it's code compliant.
And I'd like to say, make sure you always put the child's interest first. The child needs to stay at the center of attention. What about you, Dana? Do you have a takeaway for us?
Yeah, from the probate angle, if you have questions about what's going on, call a probate attorney who has experience in that practice area. They can probably answer your questions.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for joining us. We are Chicago Lawyers, and we're here to help you with all things that you need in the city. Have a good night.
So tired.
Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. We're here to talk about the legal topics that interest you and are interesting to us. Hi, ladies, how are you?
How's it going, Dana?
Great.
Hi, how are you guys?
Yeah, we're good.
Well, Elisa, I wanted to talk to you about a term I had heard about recently called unbundled legal services, because that's not something that's common in my practice, but I have heard other lawyers talk about it, and I wanted to get your take on it.
It's a new topic in terms of trying to offer flat fee models or giving a client the ability to understand what costs they're going to incur up front. So unbundling your legal services traditionally means that you are giving the client the ability to pick and choose what the lawyer is going to do for them. So by way of example, in an eviction case, if an attorney or if a client would contact me and say, Elisa, how much does an eviction cost? Can you do less than full service? I would unbundle the legal service and I could offer them writing of the legal documents or performing very limited services at a flat fee.
So you want to be hired for just a piece of it?
It's not a matter of me wanting to be hired for the piece. It's a matter of the client wanting to cut the cost.
But isn't there a risk there that you might not be fully available to them when the need arises?
Certainly, but to the degree that I would talk to the client and say, if I write your documents for you and you submit them to the court, you are representing yourself, and all I've done is prepare the papers. So
you're talking about acting more as a ghostwriter?
that's one way of looking at it. When a client comes to me, I oftentimes will offer them 3 different ways of analyzing how they can hire me. They can hire me to take on their case, they hire me as the attorney, I take over, I do everything that's necessary to make sure that they are fully represented. That's kind of plan or package A. And then package B would be like, I can prepare all the paper for you, and you go and you handle it. So I can prepare the complaint, I can prepare any summons that's necessary, all of the preparatory documents that would go into the matter, and I would prepare them, I would type them up, make them look very professional, because that's going to be what's submitted to the court.
Yeah,
So
but I have to cut you off right there, because isn't part of hiring a lawyer for the purpose of their skill as a lawyer to appear in court and talk the language that the judge understands and to try and make the points that are relevant, whereas if you're preparing all of these documents and then sending your client in to fend for himself, and this is a person that's now nervous about the proceeding, not sure what to expect, not sure or comfortable with the lingo, don't you feel that that possibly could be detrimental to the client?
I have to agree with Dana. I mean, this just spells so much trouble for me, because I'm thinking, aren't they going to be calling you every step of the way saying, Alisa, what do I do now? What do I do now? I mean, it seems like you should just be there for them to begin with.
keep in mind, I think what you two are doing is you may be twisting it to the degree that it's not me limiting the representation, it's the client. The client is saying, I do not wish to pay for full service. I do not wish to pay to have you sit in court while 50 other cases are called. I do not wish to pay for your parking. I do not wish to pay for your travel time. So what I offer the ability as part of an alternative fees schedule to say, if you'd like to handle it yourself, if you feel comfortable in doing this partially yourself, I will guide you from behind the scenes. I will give them a checklist of what they have to do, what they have to say. And so in something like an eviction or a small claims case, that's very straightforward. I am a phone call away, and I would never send a client into court for fending for themselves. It's merely a way for the client to choose the level of my representation because they wish to minimize the fee. I would never offer that in complex litigation, but for something like an eviction, a simple breach of contract, cases where it's not a lot of sophisticated skill, or it's very straightforward, and there it's very common for people to represent themselves.
I like the way you put that. It needs to be the client's choice, and it's not going to be every matter that's appropriate for unbundled services, and it's not going to be every client.
Absolutely, and it's about me saying, listen, if you don't want to pay my rate on an hourly basis and you don't want to take the chance that it will go beyond what you're interested to pay, or you're nervous, then this is something I can do for you as a limited way of being there for you, but you are cutting on the fees. Another thing I can do is they can prepare the papers themselves, and before they file them, I'll review. So and maybe make some changes or recommendations. And that is just a more limited way of me sort of assisting to offering to supervise what the client is doing pro se. But I can say, well, did you think about this? Or don't forget to attach that exhibit because the court will care about that. It's just a matter of me being flexible with the fact that the clients are nervous about fees, and to be sensitive to that, to say, I want you to hire me in general, but here's how I can accommodate your concerns about cost. And then if a client decides that it's over their head, then I can step in and they can ask me to file an appearance, and then I would just take over.
I think there's still more we can talk about on this subject, because you can go a lot of different directions with the idea of unbundled and my thought process about whether the attorney is really doing a service or a disservice for the client. But I want to switch gears, because we should also address flexibility in family law with child support. We have a current system of child support, and just like in many other areas, child support is an area of law that is subject to guidelines and interpretation and negotiation by the parties. And I want to know what you think about changing the existing system, if we should do it, and how we should.
Dana, I'm so glad you brought that up because I've been thinking about this a lot. One of the things that struck me, Elisa, is the idea of being a little bit more creative when we come to legal solutions. And I think there's always room for that, especially in family law, because what the courts prefer is for the mother and father to work out something that works for their family, right? So maybe there's something we could do that's a little bit different than the way things are run right now. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the child support structure, but the way it currently works is there's the custodial parent, and that's the one who's raising the child, usually on Monday through Friday on a regular basis. They get the kid up, take them to school, feed them dinner, that sort of thing.
So custodial doesn't necessarily mean that they have full or partial custody.
No.
It's just the primary living arrangement
Correct.
for the child.
And another term people often use is called residential parent. That's where the child resides.
But when we're talking about child support right now, we're talking about the financial aspect and not necessarily the emotional support. Or are you talking about both?
I think that they go hand in hand. So the residential parent is the one who's there. I mean, they're day in and day out, and they're probably the one who's providing the most emotional support to the child. But that doesn't diminish the role of the non-custodial parent.
And it shouldn't, right?
It really shouldn't. And I think, unfortunately, what our current child support laws do is make the non-custodial parent feel like all they're doing is writing a paycheck. And are they really supporting the child, or do they feel like they're supporting the spouse or the ex-spouse or the...
Oh, wait a minute. Now, don't the guidelines suggest a mutual co-parenting relationship where the residential parent is primarily caring for the child, but the non-custodial parent is being involved to the maximum extent they can, should they put a desire to do so?
Typically, the idea ends up being something completely separate from the reality. And the reality is the non-custodial parent typically gets the child maybe for dinner one night a week and every other weekend. And that's pretty much it.
But what if they wanted more time?
That's not always possible. And actually, that's going to bring me to my next topic, which we're not going to get into right now, is this idea of how much parenting time should each parent reasonably have with the child. But the problem with child support, it is financial, and everyone knows money is emotional, right?
Sure.
So if I have to write a check once a month, even though it's supposed to be for the child, do we really think of it that way? Do we think of it as supporting the child? Or do we think, I don't want to have to pay my ex-wife, or I don't want to have to pay my ex-girlfriend?
That depends on the ex, because if you have a situation where the split was amicable and the non-custodial parent trusts the custodial parent, they may have a better feeling about where the money's going. But
well, that's a good point, Elisa.
If the custodial parent's showing up with new purse and new bags all the time, and always showing the non-custodial parent where the money's going, then there's going to be created an issue and
well,
cause
do you think
stress.
it's a problem that we don't really know where the money's going? I mean, there's
Absolutely.
no accounting.
Well,
the
wait
court
a minute.
doesn't hold.
Is it the case that you can arrange child support so that the person paying child support pays to the third party directly, and that credit then goes towards their contribution amount? So let's say, for example, child lives with mom, dad pays child support, but instead of paying mom the full 100% value, a percentage of that amounts to the school tuition, or directly for camps,
to the third party.
Or
I think that would be the best way to do it, but I think the problem
do they do that now?
By agreement.
By agreement.
Yeah.
Sure.
I've handled a limited child support case, and that was one of the things we negotiated, but I think it's a matter of overseeing it. It's just that I think it's simpler for the state disbursement unit and for the courts to just, as a first principle, maybe Ish can weigh in on this, have the custodial parent handle the disbursement of the money and how it's spent, and then if there's a problem, they give a medium for the parties to go back into court to resolve any particular issue that might come up. But isn't it simpler in the first instance?
I think that's really a good idea, and you bring up the issue of trust, and I think as adults, both parents need to realize that they're really in this for the child's best interest, and they have to believe that the money is going to be used to support the child. I think it's a little bit harder to see how the custodial parent is supporting the child, right? I mean, we know there's a roof over their head. We know the child is eating. We hope that they're having the school supplies that they need and the equipment they need for their extracurricular activities. But to some degree, you'll never really know.
Well, I think the court can do a little bit better of a job of supervising that and asking the right questions and maybe giving periodic statuses, you know, in the early stages of a custodial settlement agreement.
But we also don't want to make this too cumbersome. I mean, when you talk about coming in with accountings and you talk about giving statuses and repeated court appearances, I mean, you are talking about you're raising your child for the next how many years, and you shouldn't have to feel like you know, have a third job to come to court and account for what you did on a regular basis.
Well, maybe that presupposes that one party would have a problem, and maybe the courts can create a more specific or direct system that channels what to do if there's a problem,
There should
rather
be
than there
a
always just be, okay, call your attorney, file a motion. I mean,
There should be a separate bank account where the custodian,
idea,
custodial
Dana.
parent has access to it, but the non-custodial parent who pays the child support has
Could see it.
transparency.
I
They
think
can
that's
see it.
right.
I was thinking about something along those lines. What if there was a bank account that was just for child support and both parents had to contribute? It didn't matter who was custodial or non-custodial. If the child deserves the support of both parents, let's make it clear.
Well,
let's
that's
have both of
interesting.
them deposit their checks into the same account and then account for where it goes.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense because from my experience, so much of the disparity and so much of the stress comes from a lack of transparency. And when one parent doesn't know what the other one is doing, a lot of assumptions are made and it makes things very stressful.
Yeah, well, trust is an issue also in my practice area, and that's because oftentimes beneficiaries and heirs are questioning what the administrator is doing, but they're not running the process and they don't have the information before them. So people will come to my office as the legatee or the beneficiary or the heir in an already existing probate administration, and they have suspicions that something is going on that shouldn't be, but they don't know what to do or whether they can do anything about it.
That's
do
a
you
really
usually
good
handle
question.
that?
I'm not sure what I would do. I can imagine feeling that way because, again, a very emotional time in your life when a loved one has died and there are assets and we're just not sure what's going on.
Right. And so if you do have suspicions, you definitely have rights as the interested person in the administration. You have a right to know what's going on. You
Who has the duty to tell you what's going on? The trustee or the
Well,
administrator?
the administrator is charged with the duty of running the estate, you know, legally and appropriately. But whether they have a duty to account at every level is a question depending on the type of administration going on. Now,
But the people who are like the family members aren't going to have any idea about that. So if someone passes away and they come to realize that one person's in charge of the end of life issues, that's the administrator?
yeah, of the
Okay.
estate.
Okay, so then do all of the family members, or they have an obligation to go through that person for any questions that they have?
Well, if that person is represented by an attorney, I would recommend contacting that attorney first as an option. And try to ask your questions and get them answered through that attorney. If you're unsuccessful, then you can contact another attorney, discuss the situation, because now you're discussing it from your own perspective as being represented by counsel.
Like you're seeking counsel
To represent
Yeah,
your
yourself.
interest.
Okay.
Yeah, and then usually that attorney, if you want to hire them to represent your interest, can make some headway into the case and explain to you what the process is.
Well, ladies, I'm really excited that we have a special guest here tonight. She's going to explain a lot about a particular process that's of huge importance to the nation right now. Her name is Officer Ramirez, and I'm really excited to announce that as soon as we come back, we'll be able to discuss the Baltimore riots.
Great. So, did you notice we had a problem? He wanted me to move to riots, but this order is that we do our 3 topics.
I can't. You've got to put it on the other screen. That's how.
Welcome back. We're here with Officer Ramirez, and we're going to be talking about the Baltimore riots and what we think about what's going on. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Thank you, Dana.
Would you tell me, Officer Ramirez, what are your thoughts about what's been going on in Baltimore?
Well, I think we have to consider when it's right to call something civil disobedience and when does it cross the line. because personally I feel that if somebody gets hurt who is an innocent victim, or somebody who got swept up in something, and when property is destroyed, really a line has been crossed, because someone has to clean up, somebody has to take care of the injured people, things like that.
So at that point, more harm than good has resulted.
Right.
And so
Isn't
that's
it
the
also
line
true that
for
maybe
you.
you lose your message? I mean, where do you really want the focus to be? Do you want it to be on what you're protesting about, or on the protests themselves?
Yeah,
Right.
but isn't part of the reason for such outbursts and really strong, passionate conduct to bring the message home loud and clear? I mean, wouldn't that be the cry of the rioters?
But what kind of message? Do you want it to be about looting and people not being able to control themselves?
Well, I think they don't go into it looting, right? They go into it wanting to send the right message, but things get out of control quickly.
I think the people who are looting are not the ones that are trying to send the message.
Right.
And it's, this happened in Louisiana with Hurricane Katrina, is that the people who loot are not the people who are typically going to be educated. It's a lot of youngsters that are taking advantage of like a lawless moment. And they're saying, I'm going to jump on this bandwagon, take this opportunity to kind of act crazy because there's no other opportunity for me to do that.
I think we also need to remember there are other kinds of protests that have been highly effective. Like in the Vietnam War, there were Buddhist monks that were self-immolating. I am not suggesting that anybody should go set themselves on fire, but this was a very powerful message, and the Buddhist monks never did anything to anybody else.
Well, we don't even have to go that far to find examples. I mean, we have plenty of examples closer to home. The entire civil rights movement was full of a lot of peaceful demonstrations. I mean, the movie Selma was a huge hit.
Well, the Occupy movement as well, in terms of protesting finance and the banking issues. I mean, just being there and being quiet and saying you can't arrest all of us, or we are the 99%. I mean, that's really effective. But there's different socioeconomic issues that are coming into play, and who's doing the rioting. The people who really want to protest police misconduct are very often the times, people who have been brutalized by police or have had negative interactions. And there's a lot of different things we need to be focusing on. I mean, like what's been going across Facebook is the woman who found her son, one of the rioters, and she went up, and I think they got her on camera, and she slapped her son and said, "Get home."
Wasn't that great? I mean, did you see that
Well,
video?
but I don't know. I think, again, it pulls away from the message. We have to keep the focus on what the issues are. And I'm not in favor of anything that distracts us from that. I don't care if it's a mom and a son, or if it's people breaking windows. I think there's been a huge injustice here.
But is it really distracting us, or is it now bringing more attention to the issue?
I think it's a dual issue, because you have part of the people, the problem with the looting is that you don't have enough parenting going on, and that's why the people are in the streets throwing
That's what
bricks.
this is all about.
No, it's not about, but you can't polarize it into one issue. This is multiple issues of how we got here. So at the end of the day, a lack of parenting is what results in people joining gangs and being on the street.
Okay, but I have a
causing trouble.
problem with blaming people who are victimized and are oppressed with actions that they take that are directly related to the situation that we found ourselves in. Do you not think it's these attitudes about these young African American men that have made them the target of so much brutality?
I think there have been a lot of groups over the course of American history that have been marginalized and kept down and kept out of jobs. The Irish, the Polish.
Officer Ramirez, world history.
Right.
Let's
the
not
Native
even limit it.
Americans haven't even gotten their turn yet. They're
Right.
still waiting for it to come back to them.
Well, and I agree. I don't think it's fair for us to say right now, well, this is just a black issue, and this is just about African Americans being oppressed. This is about the haves and the have-nots, which crosses many socioeconomic boundaries. And this is, I have come across situations with law enforcement where there's far too much antagonism for what really is going on. So I think that there is most definitely a police problem, and there's definitely an economic disparity issue, and there's a government issue, and there's a female versus male issue, and it really crosses so many lines, like the way a basket would be weaved, that how can we limit it to just the race in America issue right now, when it's so many, and it is parenting, and it is money, and it is education, it is,
Well, how about training for the police force?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be left off the table in a lot of the discussions.
Well,
we
Officer-
have extensive training, and I just have to say there are bad apples in every profession.
But why is it so much shoot to kill? I'm interested to find out. Every time you
Sure.
turn on the news and you have a police altercation, it's the death shot. I mean, why aren't we shooting people in the kneecaps? I mean, what's the problem with,
the problem is
not shooting with using deadly force?
The problem is that anytime we fire the weapon, we're supposed to be figuring that this could be a shoot to kill incident, but people move. And I
Right.
had to shoot a dog one time, so did my husband, on 2 different occasions, vicious dogs. No people around. We can't know that this person that owns the dog, is going to call the police and say, they shot my dog. They shot my dog because I'm black. It's dead of winter, this dog's menacing somebody,
Sure.
and he's a block away in his house.
And Elisa, let's put ourselves in perspective here. If you have a gun because you're an officer, and there is another individual that has a gun and points it at you, do you want to shoot him in the kneecap where he drops and then shoots you like this
Of
as
course
he's
not.
leaning down the side?
But I'm not talking about, the situation, the situation that is, or the instances that have been coming up in the media. We're not talking about the victim shooting or raising a weapon to the degree that a police officer should feel their
I don't
life
think we're
is in
even talking
imminent
about the
danger.
victim having a weapon.
Right,
In the
so-
majority of these cases, that's
At
not an
least
issue
that
at all.
we're hearing about. So if we're talking about the 5 cases that we're hearing about, those aren't the facts. So I certainly don't have any problem with the concept of draw your weapon when you're faced with a like-kind weapon. But if the perpetrator brandishes a knife, I don't think a gun is necessary. It depends. Of course, it's case by case and it's fact dependent. But what I don't understand and what's continually coming across my mind is why every shot is resulting in death. You don't even hear about lower right quadrant. You're not even hearing about getting hit in the stomach.
Maybe you don't hear about those because they're not newsworthy.
Well, how about
Right,
the fact
especially
that
with all these other bigger
Yeah.
cases.
but the current story in the news is not even necessarily about an officer
No, but I
firing
agree.
their weapon.
We can bring it back to the fact that several of these cases are the victim is not even facing the officer.
Right.
And I do have a question for you about those sorts of situations. I mean, what would be going through the officer's mind if he is firing a weapon on someone whose back is facing him?
He or she.
Right.
He or she, right.
There are
So-
female police officers, Dana.
said
Don't
he.
forget.
It's all right.
Just like there are female lawyers. Every profession.
Every department has different rules and regulations, so I can't speak for everybody. In general, it's if the person who has the weapon is placing you in immediate jeopardy, the officer, or somebody else, and you cannot close the distance between you and them soon enough to knock him over or knock the knife out of his hand, then usually you are going to be justified to use deadly force.
And I think people understand that, but there feels like a gap in understanding when the alleged perpetrator is weaponless and even
Fleeing the scene.
facing the other
Sure.
direction. That's where I think a lot of people, myself included, have a hard time understanding what could even possibly
Doesn't the
be in the
officer have to
mind.
run and chase them and then be unsuccessful before they draw their weapon? I mean, is there a rule in the training? Is there required a physical altercation? I mean, do we throw punches anymore? I mean, I'm not advocating the violence, but the violence is happening, and it's to such a degree that it's just so disconcerting from the lay perspective. From a criminal standpoint, even as an attorney, although I have a limited understanding of the criminal law, I think I look at it the same way anybody else would, and I'm like, why are they always dying? I just don't see any middle ground, and
It's disconcerting for us too, but there are plenty of circumstances, I'm sure, every day in the United States where people are shot, where people struggle with the police. There are people who go limp on us when we're trying to put handcuffs on them. I don't know if that's what was happening in Baltimore, because I saw that it seemed to me that he was holding his head level even though his feet were dragging. And we've had plenty of people struggle with us, or then they start kicking and they kick out the squad car windows. And so it's very hard to say what actually
Well,
happened.
Officer Ramirez, if I'm not mistaken, I understand you've done a lot of work with communities with regards to civil disobedience, what is justifiable, what crosses the line. Is that true? Can you speak to maybe what you've discovered actually works?
I often felt that the more information that you gave to somebody, then the problem should resolve itself, not the more money that got thrown at a situation. But it turned out that that was not the case, that people were going to lie to the police, even if it would help themselves or help somebody else, and they wouldn't get in trouble. So I think that that's a matter of how people are raised, and I hear people on the bus saying, if you don't behave, she's going to take you to jail. And it's like, these are little bitty kids, and then they look at me with their eyes aghast. So I say, no, you're too little to go to jail. And I say to the mom,
Wow,
we can't
so
do
the
that.
fear is starting even at a young age.
Yeah.
But I have,
and
to
the
tell my
message,
son, I have to tell my son that the car won't start unless he puts his seatbelt
Yeah,
on,
but
because
think about
the police
message.
get a special signal if his seatbelt's not buckled. So
Wait a minute though, are we
Well,
saying
there are trust issues on all different
are
levels.
we saying
Right.
that
So
young
Officer
children are not
Ramirez-
safe? We need to know this.
We might be saying that, and we will talk about it in the future. Officer Ramirez, thank you for contributing your thoughts to this conversation.
It's good to
We're
be here.
going to wrap it up with some takeaways. I think that my takeaway from this is that there is a lot of improvement that needs to be done in the system. There's a lot of questioning that needs to be done and is being done, and part of it is coming through our protesters. I would like to see it happen more peacefully.
I agree very much, and I think that a lot of it goes down to communication, and to the degree that people who are confronting, the police and law enforcement can do a lot better job of communicating themselves, and police can in turn be better communicators, and I think that would go a long way.
I think we need to think about what the message is. What really is the takeaway for our country? Are we raising children to fear police? Should police be feared? Or can we develop a different type of dialogue? Can we engage in a different conversation?
And whatever gets destroyed, somebody has to pay for it and start all over again.
Right.
Definitely.
Well, thank you for joining
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you, gals.